Aware, I've given an update on the flood situation in New South Wales this morning, and I want to stress that our thoughts and empathy and our support is first and foremost to all of the people across the state who have either been evacuated, who are in fear of their safety or fear of losing their homes, and I want to stress that from the outset. However, having considered that, the New South Wales Government was always intending to make some further announcements today in relation to easing COVID restrictions, and I appreciate the timing of this, but I also appreciate how important it is for New South Wales to keep moving forward even during difficult times. These are difficult times. The unprecedented catastrophic weather conditions, coupled with dealing with a pandemic off the back of a deep drought and off the back of the catastrophic bushfire season, has meant it's been a difficult time. But a number of things have been learned during the last 18 months, 2 years in our state, and one of them is that at every opportunity, with empathy and with compassion, you need to keep moving forward. And that's why today I'm pleased to announce the New South Wales Government will be easing restrictions. There will no longer be any caps on weddings and funerals. You will be able to dance and sing in any environment, including places of worship. You'll be able to have as many people in your home as you can. And for those of you fortunate to have large homes, if you have more than 100 people, you must make sure that all of them are registered electronically so we have a record of who they are. And in terms of mask wearing, it will no longer be mandatory in any setting, including public transport, although we do recommend it where you can't guarantee social distancing. We appreciate many more people will be catching public transport, and whilst masks are not compulsory, it is our strongest advice that if you feel you're on a service which is during the peak hour where you can't maintain social distancing, we strongly recommend you wear a mask. But masks will not be required to be mandatory in any setting unless or I should say, we strongly recommend you wear it, but they won't be mandatory in any setting, including public transport. Can I also stress the following? These easing of restrictions will only work if all of us stay COVID safe. And what does that mean? It means good social distancing. Most importantly, it means registering QR codes wherever we go. Now, that is the key to our success. If there is an outbreak and we can't identify all the people in a particular venue, we'll be having to go backwards again, and I don't want to see that happen. We are doing really well, and the way that we'll continue to do well is a couple of things. And firstly, it's registering. We're not telling businesses how they should make it happen, but my expectation is that every time you enter a premise, every time you attend an event which requires a QR code, that there are people in place to make sure that happens. And it's up to the business or the organisers of an event to make sure that happens. But we desperately need everybody to keep registering QR codes. And I'm also making sure that over the next few weeks, we're going to up compliance. So whether it's through our regulators or through the police, there are harsh penalties for people, for businesses and organisations who don't comply with the QR codes. And we will come down hard on businesses and individuals if that's not maintained, because compliance and keeping COVID safe is key to this. Can I also stress the following point? I am so deeply grateful that 12,300 people came forward and got tested in the last 24 hours. Now, given the extreme weather conditions we experienced and given what many people were going through, that is a great result, and we need to maintain that. If you're feeling unwell, you need to get tested and stay home. Stay home. Don't go anywhere, because we need to do everything we can as we're easing restrictions to make sure we keep the virus at bay if it does escape and it does get into the community. And of course, I'm also pleased to say that the vaccine rollout in New South Wales is going well, notwithstanding the difficult circumstances. I now received an update this morning that 100% of all of our quarantine workers have at least had their first shot, and many are now getting their second shot of the Pfizer vaccine, and that is great news. We're also moving on to vaccinate the families of the quarantine workers in addition to frontline health workers. So every day that we move forward, the risk is reducing, and we are living in a COVID safe way. We will be living with COVID for 3 or 4 years, perhaps. Health experts can't tell us, and nor should they be able to, because it's an unknown. But we need to find a safe way of living with COVID whilst we maintain our freedoms and our ability to work and get work, and that is really critical. And I want to thank everybody in that process. And I just want to send a message to everybody who is doing it tough in New South Wales today, that of course those experiencing extreme hardship and heartache because of the floods are always top of mind for us. But we also need to make sure we keep moving forward together in a COVID safe way, and that's why the government's decided to continue with easing our restrictions today. These come into force from Monday, the 29th of March. And what is really, really important is for all of us to maintain that level of COVID safety. Easing restrictions only works when you keep getting tested and staying home if you're not feeling well or having the symptoms. If you make sure, if you're an individual or a business or an organisation, you use those QR codes to register people coming onto your premises, because that will make sure health has the ability to get on top of any community transmission that may occur. And again, I finish where I started, in deeply thanking the public, our frontline workers, and all of us together who've enabled New South Wales to get to where we have. And we've had a lot thrown at us, and we'll continue to have a lot thrown at us. But working together, moving forward together, will allow all of us to support one another during these difficult times and into the future. I'll now ask Dr. Chant to give an update on obviously the medical aspects of what we're announcing today. Then the Treasurer will talk about the importance of this, given JobKeeper comes to an end on Sunday, and we're doing everything we can to increase jobs and support jobs in New South Wales. And then of course all of us will be able to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Premier. So New South Wales recorded no locally acquired cases of COVID in the 24 hours to 8 p.m. last night, and we had 3 new cases were acquired overseas, and 1 previously reported case was excluded following further investigation. As the Premier has indicated, we've had well over 12,000 tests, and thank you to every individual who's come forward for testing. We are able to ease these restrictions with the knowledge that we don't have any community transmission at this time. We are still in the final throes of following up the incursion event where we had the security guard, but to date, none of the close contacts have yielded positive results. We still have probably another few days to run, and can I thank everyone for their cooperation in getting tested. Many people have presented for multiple tests, so thank you very much for that. The basis of this is that we have no community transmission, and we've further strengthened our borders. As the Premier has indicated, we've rolled out those vaccines, first dose of vaccines, to our quarantine and border workers. We're approaching the second dose. We've also enhanced our surveillance, monitoring, and our engagement with border and quarantine workers. However, the COVID continues to be transmitted internationally. There are increasing variants of concern as a proportion of cases that are coming in through our system. It is likely that we will get incursion events into the future, and therefore it is important that we remain alert and in particular take some simple precautions. And they are: do not go out and about if you're unwell with respiratory symptoms. Stay at home, get tested, and when you're going to seek health care, please wear a mask. So I'd ask that everyone has a mask. It is a very important component of protecting us against respiratory virus transmission, including COVID. I would also then ask that everyone checks in. And I know that it is sometimes easy to become complacent when you hear the fact that we're reporting no community transmission. But it is an incredibly important mitigation measure to know that we've rapidly been able to contact everyone who's been at a venue. If we do happen to have a transmission event or an infectious person in those venues, gives us the confidence to provide advice to government that we can afford to just hold there, because we have managed to contact everyone, get them into quarantine, and that we don't have an ongoing risk to the community. If we cannot contact trace, we are going to be having to take a much more precautionary line. So my plea to you is, with this easing of restrictions comes additional responsibilities to continue to get tested, maintain that mask wearing. Always when you're accessing healthcare, wear a mask if you've got respiratory symptoms to protect you and to protect others around you, and also to do those QR codes. Thank you.
Thanks, Kerry. Well, as the Premier has said, today's great announcement comes off the backdrop of a very difficult time for many people across our state with the floods, and we commit as a government that we'll continue to do whatever we can. We've significantly invested in the event that these situations occur, not just through floods but fires and the drought beforehand. And the New South Wales government remains committed to provide whatever financial support is needed to help those communities who have been affected by this flood once it's finished, that people get back on their feet as quickly as possible. But today is a great day for the people of New South Wales. Dancing's back, singing's back, the sun's back and fun's back here in New South Wales. If we look at where we were last year, the strategy that we have taken, as the Premier said, to get to the end of March, we wanted to have as many restrictions lifted in New South Wales as possible, to be in a position where our economy was functioning and operating as close to it was at pre-pandemic levels. And to be here today to make the announcements that we are demonstrates the success that we've had, whilst there is a long way to go. And a lot of that success rests with the health team that have done an amazing job, whether it's through the hotel quarantining, the tracking and tracing teams. It's enabled New South Wales to get across and on top of this virus, and it's also a testament to our people. And if you look just this weekend at what's on offer here in Sydney, Summer in the Domain is on. The Slippers are going to be racing at Rose Hill. The rugby league's on at Bank West Stadium. The Swans are back at a full house crowd at the SCG. Hamilton's premiering on Saturday night, and now Brad and I are going clubbing next week. This is an amazing achievement from where we were just last year. I mean, you put that in context. You might recall that at that time we were closing beaches. Bondi Beach was being closed. To be here today and have New South Wales opened up in circumstances where, particularly in places across Europe, they're still in lockdown. So to have the freedoms and the opportunities we have is a testament to the people of our state. But as the Premier has said, there is a long way to go. JobKeeper finishes at the end of March. We're getting very close to that point, and we've been monitoring and making sure that there is stimulus support for those industries in areas that need it. We continue to be particularly concerned about the Sydney CBD and wanting to make sure that we have as much activity as possible to keep businesses going. We've always said we wanted to keep as many businesses in business and people employed during this period of time. But to even be in the budget last year, we were predicting 7.5% unemployment in December, to be at 5.6% today. Now, that number will increase. It will obviously increase in circumstances where that JobKeeper program finishes. But we will do whatever we can to make sure as many people right across our state remain in work. Today's announcement will add around $50 million per month to the New South Wales economy. We are pretty much back to normal, and that's such a great thing for the people of our state. There are still issues ahead that we continue to look at in terms of the return of international students, a substantial contributor to the New South Wales economy, around $14 billion every year. But international borders, as we know, are a matter for the federal government. So within our jurisdiction here in New South Wales, we have done everything we can. It's a great day for people right across our state, and we get back to living life as normally as possible.
Questions? Pulling the trigger today with these restrictions, is it a change in strategy in terms of, not so much suppression, that we're just now going to live with the virus?
No, today's entirely consistent with our strategy, which is obviously zero community transmission, and that still remains our target. But obviously the vaccine rollout, as I said some weeks ago, changes the way we need to look at how we live with COVID. The vaccine doesn't necessarily mean you won't get it, but it does mean you're highly unlikely to go into hospital with a severe case of COVID. And it also is likely to mean you won't pass it on to others as much as you could have had you not had the vaccine. The vaccine is a powerful, powerful weapon in allowing us to live with COVID more freely able to moving around, but also in a more open way. And we need to put that into context. So our strategy has always been for zero community transmission. And now that we have the vaccine, as I've said on a number of occasions, we need to change the way we think about how we update the community into the future. I think, as I've said previously, and it's no big secret, that simply providing the number of cases every day once the majority of people have the vaccine is not informing the public really of how we're dealing with COVID. What is a truer measure will be, moving forward, how many people we manage to keep out of hospital. So how many people get the virus in a serious way. It should be the measure moving forward once, and I say this qualified, once the vast majority of our population are vaccinated. So we do need to start thinking about how we change the way in which we update the community on COVID, how we accept what living with COVID means. In the absence of a vaccine, zero community transmission, and as is the case now, is still our objective. And we fight every day to keep the virus out of the community. But once the vast majority of our population is vaccinated, it gives us that little bit more freedom to think about how we can live with COVID. And they're the conversations we're starting to have. And the vaccine is a game changer, and we said that from the outset.
These are some pretty major changes, Premier. I mean, nightclubs, they have been open since the start of the pandemic. But I mean, capacity limits of 1 person per 2 square metres are still in place. I mean, can you explain why people will be able to go to a nightclub where I don't think there's too much social distancing, but there's still 1 person per 2 square metres?
Look, our expectation is that the one person per 2 square metres gives us that extra level of comfort to mitigate against a super spreading event. But because we are progressing well in vaccinating our quarantine workers, our border workers, our air crew, their families, in addition to emergency service personnel, health on the front line, because a number of people in New South Wales are going through that vaccine process now, it is reducing our risk of a super spreading event. And we've always held the position in New South Wales that we want to reduce the burden on our citizens as much as possible. And I have confidence that the public will continue to do what's safe. For some people, as Minister Hazzard points out all the time, some people may choose to still limit their activity, to still be extra safe, and I commend that. If you're someone who's vulnerable, someone who has ongoing concerns about the virus, you can and will make decisions for yourself on what is safe for you to do. But what we are obligated to do is assess the risk and also then provide freedoms and easing of restrictions against that risk. It would be improper for us as a government not to ease restrictions when the health experts tell us it's safe to do so. And following that advice is why we've made the announcements today. Well, the important thing for us is to always ease restrictions, then see the response and see the outcome. And we believe very strongly in always moving forward, and what we've announced today are quite significant easing of restrictions. And there's not much left between now and what we had pre-COVID, except to say the proviso is you have to keep those testing rates up if you have symptoms. You must continue to hand sanitize. You must continue social distancing. And of course, importantly, anywhere you go, that QR code system will be our saviour against the spread of COVID. It will reduce the chance of super spreading events getting out into the community. And that is our weapon against fighting COVID in this stage of the pandemic. We are in a transition stage, and Dr. Chant has said this many times. Once the vaccine rollout starts and we have zero community transmission, from a public policy perspective, it's very challenging for us to get that right balance, but today we feel is an important next step in getting that right balance.
Kerry, this morning you said that the flood recovery really gets going today. Can you tell us a little bit more about what that's going to look like and what role the ADF will play?
Certainly, as I said this morning at the press conference, the ADF have an important role in the clean-up work in particular. So Brigadier Garraway, who you may be aware supported the ADF coordination efforts during the bushfires, is back at Homebush to coordinate the ADF's response with our own agencies in relation to the cleanup. So as we know, there are only a small number of areas where the SES has to date said you have the all clear to go back in, but we're hopeful that over the next few days, more communities will be advised they have the all clear to go back in and do the cleanup process. But I need to say that in the context of the fact that many communities today will be experiencing increased height in their river systems, increased flows in their catchments. So we are still going through a dangerous period of managing the flood crisis itself. And today's priority will be keeping people safe, but also getting food and other immediate supplies to those who've been isolated and stranded and cannot access those supplies. And where the ADF can assist in that process, they will. We have a number of aircraft they've made available to us. And so if there is that requirement, they are there. But I also want to stress that not only is this the effort of the SES and the ADF, but our police, the RFS, fire and rescue, all hands are on deck in New South Wales. And our priority today is keeping people safe, getting immediate supplies to them. But in those pockets where SES does give the all clear, the cleanup process can commence, and we need to gear up for that. It's going to be a long process, but we want to make it as short as possible. We want to provide people who are going back to confronting situations with the hope that they'll be supported in the cleanup process. And as tragic as the catastrophic bushfires were, they taught us much about how to deal with cleanup and recovery, and we're using what we've learned to apply to this event, which is still unfolding. I mentioned this morning that I had a bit of a spring in my step because the sun is out, but the danger is still there. At least we know we're not going to experience heavy rainfall for at least another week. The weather fronts that we thought would cause us more concern have moved through, but we are still facing threats of rising rivers and increasing water in catchments, and also the flows which will eventually come down through southeast Queensland will also have a big impact on parts of New South Wales. So whilst all that is occurring, we still have to focus on cleanup and recovery. We have thousands of people who've been evacuated, in fact around 23,000 people who've already been evacuated, thousands and thousands of others that are on alert who may be evacuated. And in that context, it is again a job of making sure we keep people safe and get supplies to them, but also start turning our minds to clean up so that we can support our communities as quickly as possible.
Just back on COVID, just in terms, you mentioned something about compliance. So we in nightclubs and pubs now with the 1 foot square metre rule, are there going to be compliance? How's it going to be policed?
Well, as you know, there are fines of $5,000 for businesses who don't comply, individuals $1,000. What I've asked today specifically is for our police and also for our regulators through Service New South Wales to increase their compliance activity over the next few weeks. As we're easing restrictions, it's more important than ever before for all of us not to be complacent. We get real-time information on compliance in relation to QR codes, and it's okay, but we want it to be better. And if there are individuals or businesses not doing the right thing, unfortunately, we will have to throw the book at them. And there are harsh penalties for that, and compliance efforts will be increasing during the next few weeks to make sure that as we ease restrictions, individuals, organisations, businesses and other institutions in community in society are doing the right thing and making sure they have the systems in place to keep everybody safe.
You mentioned social distancing. Though, Premier. I mean, mingling's allowed at pubs, nightclubs now back open. Police aren't going to be. Well, they've never policed social distancing.
Well, no, we've always relied on the common sense of the people of New South Wales to respect the health advice we're giving them. And to date, we haven't been let down, quite the opposite. The community has been absolutely fantastic in following our advice, in taking our advice. There's always a small minority of people that may not do the right thing. But the experience we've had in the last 12 months has overall been an extremely positive one in the way in which the community has responded to the advice we've provided in a common sense way. And I say to everybody, the strongest message in the pandemic is it's not just about you, it's about your loved ones. If you're safe, you're keeping those you love the most safe. And that is... Well, obviously, I think we've made that very clear. Obviously, the 1.5 metre rule of social distancing should be applied where possible, but obviously when you're with a household or with people you're in contact with regularly, we ask for common sense, and that's always been the position from day one. But just because we have zero community transmission and the vaccine rollout has commenced, the risk of spreading the virus is still there. And as Dr. Chant, as Minister Hazzard, and all of us say every day, we know what the rules are, we know what the advice is, and it's up to all of us to apply them in a common sense way and to make sure that that is the way in which we continue to move forward together.
So how, just with dancing in concerts, I mean, literally I'm just reading a tweet that I've just been sent. What about a mosh pit, for instance, which is popular for young people? How's that going to be managed and controlled, that sort of thing?
Well, obviously, we also rely on event organisers to stick to their COVID safe plan. So what Health has done, and through Service New South Wales and also Health, is have COVID safe plans in place to make sure that major event organisers of those type of events follow the COVID safe plan. I'll just see if one of the health experts want to comment further on that.
Everyone would have to be seated?
No, so the concept is that we are premised these easing of restrictions on the basis that we don't have any community transmission, and that we have put in a range of strategies to really reduce the risk of an incursion event. And what I mean by an incursion is for a security guard, a cleaner, someone interacting with international return travellers that then get infected and then potentially pass it on. Now that risk always exists, but our quarantine system has been very effective. The controls we've put in around that have progressively been strengthened as we've learned more about the virus and have new tools such as the salivary testing strategy. Now, because of that, we have greater confidence that the risk of us having significant unrecognised transmission in the community is reduced. We've also scaled up our sewage surveillance system, and it's really pleasing to see that our testing rates are actually holding up. So thank you very much to the community. But the settings we've got now do allow transmission. So what we need to do is get the community used to taking those practical steps where it's reasonable. So if you've got plenty of space, don't crowd 1.5 metre within a person. But obviously if you're in a situation where you're seated, you're with your party group or with your friend and household group, then that 1.5 is not really necessary. It's about thinking about into the future how we just realise that the safeguards against COVID transmission are washing our hands, maintaining that distancing, preferencing outdoor environments. So they're the background things that we want the community to understand, because once, down the track, and I'm talking a very long time into the future, but it is important to know that we will not have got rid of COVID. We will need to learn how to live with COVID at a point, probably when we've substantially vaccinated our population, before we think about that. But what I'm trying to say is some of those protective behaviours of not going to work when you've got flu-like, when you've got respiratory symptoms, cough, cold, they've been really positive things out of our COVID response, which we want to maintain. So ultimately our settings mean that we will be likely, if you've got 100 guests in your household and there is an infected person there, basically we will see transmission within the household, but then we want to make sure that we're able to rapidly contact all of those individuals. So this is a partnership with the community about saying, with these easing of restrictions, we're reducing the risk that there's a likely an event where you are at threat, but you always have to remember that it can come from nowhere, as we've seen in the past, and therefore we're asking you particularly just to take those practical measures to reduce the risk, and also the QR codes when you've got those bigger gatherings.
Dr. Chant, what about two strangers in a nightclub who meet and want to maybe dance a little closer? How does that work?
That is fine and acceptable. So basically what we're saying is we're accepting that our setting, within the parameters of whatever is appropriate. Please do not construe my comments. So what I'm trying to say is that the settings we've got, if you've got 100 people in your house, we've already messaged indoor environments. If you had 100 people indoors and there was an infectious person, there will be transmission in that setting if that person is infectious and able to transmit. So the reality is what our settings are now is to really prevent those incursion events or pick them up as early as possible. But we do need the support of the community. For instance, thank you to every one of those people at Pancakes on the Rocks who did the QR code and checked in. That meant that we could rapidly, when that community exposure was announced, respond to that. And that's, I suppose, what we're asking the community to do, is that there will be settings where transmission can happen if there's an infectious person in those settings. So therefore we do need to make sure that you do your QR codes. And also, for heaven's sakes, do not go night clubbing, to church, to a hospital, to an aged care facility if you have got respiratory symptoms. You know, we may not have COVID, but we also have respiratory syncytial virus floating around. We may well have flu in a few months' time. So these practices of not spreading your respiratory viruses around is probably something that I'd like to see a change in our attitudes and behaviours into the future.
What would it take to put these restrictions back on?
I think the reality is the community needs to know that we'll continue to watch the situation and provide updated advice to government. We are still rolling out the second dose of the vaccine in our border workers. We're still further strengthening our safeguards. We're continuing to do quality improvement, to do everything we can to prevent incursions and also detect them as early as possible. But we will monitor the situation and how the community responds. I would be pleased to see check-ins through the QR data that Service New South Wales has got in real time increasing, because we have seen some slight dip in that as people have become more complacent.
It'd have to be a pretty bad outbreak to put some restrictions on.
Look, I think that we've learnt in New South Wales the areas where restrictions are necessary. So the sorts of things that cause me concern is if I have a diagnosed, recognised case in the community and I don't know the source of that case, that would concern me. If people have been infectious for a large percentage of time in the community, that would concern me. If they've been to venues which is associated with lots of singing, dancing, all the things that we've talked about which are risks of transmission, that would concern me. So we will assess the situation case by case, but at the moment our strategy is to detect those transmission events at the earliest possible point to make sure we're not dealing with something with all those unknowns. But as we have always done, we're mindful of the impact that restrictions have on people's health and well-being, and we will do our best. But it is a compact with the community. If you can meet us halfway by doing those QR codes, don't go out and about, continue to get tested, that will really assist us.
Premier, just on women, about 6 years ago you said that there should be targets to get more women elected to the Liberal Party. Is it time now for quotas?
Oh, look, there's no doubt that those targets clearly haven't worked, and we do need to have that conversation, but it doesn't begin and end with quotas. And today the upper house of the New South Wales Parliament has an opportunity to put action where they've mouthed words. You can't be out there one day marching for women's rights and more women in leadership positions and then come into this place and pull on stunts and not support the government's candidate who just happens to be an outstanding woman. Now, we need a bit of respect and we need wholesale change if we're serious about this. And the one reason why we've been successful in dealing with the challenges New South Wales has had in the last 18 months is because government, business, community have all worked together. And that's what we need to do if we want real change in the way women are respected and the way women are treated.
But isn't that a bit hypocritical? You only promoted one to your cabinet. Why didn't you put women in?
Look, across the coalition, we've had increasing women in leadership positions. We've had the first female Attorney General, the first female Minister for Agriculture, the first female Transport Minister, the first female Treasurer, the first female elected Premier, I dare say. But can I say it's not about us? Can I make that very clear? This is not about elected representatives. It's about the next generation. It's about ensuring that women don't experience what they've experienced all too frequently, and it's about making society stronger and better. At the end of the day, equality and good gender representation makes community and society stronger. And if anyone thinks there's one solution to this, I think that's misguided. There has to be a multi-pronged approach, And one thing that's very important is critical mass. We need to have in all of our institutions, in all of our establishments, a greater representation of women. And I've not spoken about this much in the past because firstly, it's not about me. And secondly, I hope in history people don't refer to me as a female premier. I hope they just refer to me as a premier. But we still have a long way to go. I can't tell you the number of times when I read that adjective before my title. But again, it's not about me, and it's not about the elected representatives, but it's about the legacy we leave collectively. And as elected representatives, of course, we have that responsibility. We bear it.
That's a no to quotas.
I'm sorry?
No to quotas.
No, I'm open-minded to that. I think targets have failed us. We haven't succeeded in getting 50% of women in parliaments. But it's not just the number of women, it's the culture. And sometimes women let women down. And you can't have a situation where on the one hand, the upper house of the parliament is prepared to break convention and not support the government's candidate, who happens to be a really good woman, and then on the other hand say that governments need to do more. I mean, this is a collective responsibility, and I want to be able to walk into boardrooms. I want to be able to walk to community functions and organisations and have more women represented in leadership positions, but it's not something that has one solution, and it's not one particular policy change, and it's not one or two people having a shift. It has to come from a lot of people at the same time committed to a process, and partly through leading by example, but partly through also supporting, unfortunately, measures against that subconscious bias that all of us have against what it means to be a leader, or what it means to be a public official, or what it means to be a leader in a community organisation. I'm really confident that the process that's started, that the conversations we're having will lead to real change. But all of us have to step up and be consistent, and all of us have to step up and make sure that the legacy we leave is a more positive one. And where possible, we need to take the politics out of it. It's much broader than that. I don't want people to go through the same difficulties others have to get to where they've reached, the positions they've reached.
Quotas help with those cultural problems that we're talking
Oh,
about and give hope to those
I've said that. I've said that definitely. I've not ruled that out at all. In fact,
Did you have a quota in the Liberal Party, the pre-selection? of
well,
female
look,
candidates?
if I answer your question specifically, I fall down the trap of implying that there's one solution to the challenges we face, and it's more than one solution. Quotas, I think, are part of the story, but they're not the only policy. They're not the only thing we need to look at. And you can have the best rules in place, you can have the best measures in place, but we also have to accept that a lot of the policies and a lot of the culture is also because of the way in which we conduct our business. So you can have any rule in place you like, but the adversarial nature of some of our institutions doesn't support women being welcomed in those institutions, and they're conversations we need to have. They're certainly conversations that can't begin and end with one press
You have a
conference.
front bench vacancy, You have a front bench
Yeah.
vacancy, Premier. Your front bench vacancy which you need to fill. Will you put a woman in that position?
Oh, look, I'm not going to comment on those matters at this stage. What I will comment on is the Liberal Party has put forward an outstanding woman in the upper house. Convention has it that the government of the day does select their candidate for the upper house presidency. The Labor Party chose to ignore that convention. They changed the rules, and now they won't support. Well, I hope they change their mind. I understand the upper house isn't coming back till 2:30, but this is the inherent hypocrisy that exists at all levels, and I'm part of that system. I'm not going to deny that. We all are. But respect has to start from all of us collectively wanting to make a difference, and having respect for the way we treat each other in all levels of our dealings, because the best rules and measures in place don't change culture and don't shift perceptions. But what does, if there's a commitment by good people in government, in business, in community, saying what is acceptable and what is not. Because if you don't have respect, that escalates into, as we've seen, unfortunately, more severe cases of actions against women.
If I could ask you a couple of questions on floods. So, are you,
No, I'm sorry, she was asking a question. Thank you.
are you confident that your modelling and flood maps are correct or up to date?
Well, look, I don't have any advice to suggest that's not the case, but there's no doubt that when you have a coordinated response to a major event, it is you can take the opportunity to update those. I've not had anyone present that to me, and certainly I have confidence in the advice I'm receiving about things, but if there's improvements to be made, and there always are, when you go through an unexpected catastrophic event, there's always opportunities to improve and always opportunities to make a difference in terms of the future, and we'll certainly take those learnings, but I've not had anyone raise that with me.
What about roads? Have you got any idea about the damage bill to
No.
roads, whether you've been helping council, so they've got to be...
Yeah, today, as Commissioner York said first thing this morning, we are making assessments on stress testing bridges to make sure they're safe. If we give an all clear to a community, we want to make sure the bridges they're using to get back home are safe, the roads they're using to get back home are safe, and we'll obviously undertake that audit process in due course. But primarily today, we're still in the midst of a crisis in keeping people safe, getting vital supplies to them, and making sure that we don't lose any lives during this process. Sorry, Ashley had a question.
Just Dominic, Perrottet, can we ask you about quotas, what your view on what quotas are? Do you think it's time to quotas?
Well, I think the Liberal Party can always do better, but let's put this in perspective. We've elected within our ranks the first female Prime Minister in New South Wales, and what a great thing that is. What did I say? Premier. What did I say? Prime Minister. Oh well, we'll get to that. We'll get to that next. Sorry. Yeah, but the first elected Premier in New South Wales, we're standing with the Chief Health Officer in Kerry, Chant. We have leading public servants here in the New South Wales government who are women doing amazing things for the people of our state. Now, all organisations have challenges, and I think the Liberal Party certainly has that, and we should do better, and we should look at other ways in which we can promote women so that they feel that they can put their hands up to run for pre-selection and run for public office. The more diversity you have in Parliament, I believe the better our parliaments and representation will be for the people of our state.
So open to quotas for pre-selections then? Open to quotas?
I'm open to any ideas that will help encourage women to run for public office, because as I said, the more diversity we have, the better our parliaments will be.
And Treasurer, just in terms of the cost of the flood recovery, it's going to be huge.
Yeah.
A lot of councils are starting to say that they don't know where the money's coming from to help with the immediate cleanup. Where is that money going, and how fast is it going up?
Well, we've already, and the Premier and myself have spoken to the Emergency Services Minister, and there is discussions underway in relation to Category C funding with the Commonwealth Government. And we will pursue those approaches. As the Premier said yesterday, we've appointed the Deputy Premier to coordinate that recovery, and we will do everything we can and provide the financial support that's needed to get these communities back on their feet. We have a strong track record in doing that through drought and fires, and we'll do it again with floods.
Final question, please.
For Western Sydney's Stuart Ayres basically indicated today that a rebuild of Penrith Stadium is likely. Is the whole of the 800 million saved from ANZ, is that going to go towards 3 Sydney stadiums?
So firstly, the Minister is doing exactly what a great local member should be doing, and that's advocating for his electorate of Penrith. What we have said is that we will look through business cases in relation to suburban stadiums. The government hasn't made any decision yet. But we will make sure that any investment we make is in the best interests of local communities and the people of our state.
So that 800 million, what's happened to that money?
No, that money, as we announced at that point in time, went towards our COVID stimulus packages. That was an announcement we made 6 months ago, and those projects have helped drive infrastructure investment in this state during that period of time. We've made that very clear. Having said that, we'll continue to work with the NRL and make sure we have the best sporting facilities that we can have for the people of our state.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.